Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining me this Friday, September 22nd. I'm Greg Swartz. I am the big man half of Big Man Weed Dram. And for one last time, I do not have a Weed Dram with me. I have a can of seltzer. 2 days left in my dry month. So I hopefully I will be able to compensate. But I hope also my guest will drink two drams for me. My guest this week is Mr. Mark Pruett, who is a longtime friend of the film, is the editor in chief of Whiskey Network magazine at whiskey.network.net, which is it itself has been a friend of the film. We've done some screenings, we've done some tastings, I've written some stuff. Our producer Nate has written some stuff for them. So and I wanted to talk to Mark about the changes there and his new role and everything that's going on there. So without further ado, allow me to welcome. Hi.
Hey, good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Um, it's nice to be talking to someone in my own time zone.
Yeah, that's kind of interesting. I had this grandiose plan that I was going to play a joke on you, and I was going to do the fifth element. When Ruby Red is over the top and he's got his microphone and he's going crazy, he has all these sound effects, and Bruce Willis just gives the hi, sort of that wooden laconic response. I was going to try and do that, but I couldn't pull it off because I couldn't keep a straight face. So here we are. Hi, good afternoon.
Hi. Um, I I usually I do this at 1 o'clock on clocks. Jeez, I'm sober. I do this at 1 o'clock on Fridays because I'm 8 hours behind Scotland, and so many of the people I've had on here are in Scotland, and I can't do it any later than that. I'm already kind of putting a dent in their Friday nights, So it's a strange experience to start drinking at 1 o'clock every Friday, but there's worse things in the world.
I
Um,
instructed the loyal Whiskey Network audience to get into the audience and turn this into a pretty crazy mosh pit. So let's see if the American audience is different.
oh, good. um, well, thanks for joining me. As people may know, I wrote a piece for Whiskey Network about our upcoming some of these sequels, including the one was featured with the one about bourbon that we're working on. We're already editing one about independent bottlers and unrelated to it, but beer. I mean, let's say it's related. But anyway, enough about me. Enough about you. Let's talk about me some more. No, tell me a little bit about what's going on with you and Whiskey Network um, and everything that's going on in your whiskey world.
Well, I've been a feature writer for Whiskey Network for the better part of 3 years. And uh, Bill Varnell, who is the publisher of the magazine, has been very generous. He has sort of slowly let out the leash and allowed me to do a lot of things. I've been able to talk to a lot of really cool people. I believe that there's a very strong connection between music and whiskey, and Bill has allowed me to explore that. We've had some great guests, but the great thing about Whiskey Network is being a lifestyle magazine, we can touch on all things. We've got Mai, who writes great food recipes. We have Jim, who writes great cocktail recipes. Uh, Joe and David at one point were talking about, I think David at one point was talking about cigar pairings. Um, Hazel brings in the women and whiskey perspective. So there is a very wide perspective that we're bringing in from whiskey. We're not a stodgy online magazine about whiskey that gets upset when you put ice in it. I think it's more about just exploring things and accepting things and uh, just learning as much as you possibly can.
Yeah, and it's always just fun to share. Every now and then I have this moment where I'm like, part of my whiskey drinking on most days is I will get a whiskey out, decide on which I'm going to drink. I get a glass out, and then I'm like, oh wait, I got to take a picture of it. That's become like this sort of like interstitial step. Um, I
I'm
saw that.
guilty.
I saw one of the people that's in the chat is Chad, the Chadman from Whiskey Bourbon
Welcome,
Scotch
Chad.
Enthusiast, and he posted the link to the Whiskey Network in the chat, and I'm going to post it right here. In case anyone doesn't know, I'm sure most people who are here are already members, but I highly recommend it. It's always fun to lob a photo out there. I never post anything without a photo. I don't know why that is. I don't know what that is. It's not a rule. Not I don't just mean in your group. I mean in any Facebook group. I always post with photos.
Well, Whiskey Network is closely related to the WBSE whiskey group that is on Facebook. We are close brother and sister, and we draw a lot from that group. But recently, with the changes, if you go and look, there's a new look and feel to the platform. We are not we're not publishing once a month. We're publishing constantly. And I'd like to thank you because you delivered a great piece for Bourbon Heritage Month. So did Nate. We've had some other perspective. Murphy Quint from Cedar Ridge gave us some thoughts about Bourbon Heritage Month. I'm expecting something from Tommy Burnett and also from Ari Sussman, Iron Smoke and Three Chord Bourbon, respectively. So that's how we're evolving and that's how we're changing. And look, let me at least talk about something, because the 3 years that I've been writing for Whiskey Network magazine, I've had an editor. I'd like to call out Mindy Schwartz. She's probably in the chat as Bonnie Parker. But Mindy and
no
I
relation to me, by the
way. Yes, spells it differently. We remain great friends to this day. I mean, if it's good for the story, I'll tell you that it was me who triumphed over the Wicked Witch of the Midwest. But that's not true. Mindy needed to take a break, and I'm stepping in. And everything that you see about how we're changing at Whiskey Network is stuff that Mindy and I have been talking about for years. So let me put the rumor to rest that it wasn't me deposing her. It was me stepping into some very big shoes to fill.
Awesome. Well, it's funny. After I wrote that piece for you about our upcoming film and stuff, my brain kept spinning because I did a scouting trip to Kentucky with Brad, our cinematographer, and who was originally from Kentucky. Although we weren't in the part of Kentucky, we were in Bardstown. He's from outside of Cincinnati, that whole northern Kentucky bit. But anyway, I can't tell you how many stories popped into my head after I wrote that. I was like, oh, we did this. We could have done this, and we could have done this, and we went to the Bourbon Bistro in Louisville, and I guess the bourbon industry, like a lot of the people in the industry hang out there, and like,
yep.
Just sitting at the bar, I was with the people from Peerless, and they were like, oh, they work for this company. He works for this company. He's a distiller there. He's the brand ambassador for this company. It was this crazy evening, and I was just like, I'm going to have the same problem I had in Scotland, which is just the sort of tough decisions of what to fit in. And it's not about our decisions with the Water of Life weren't about what I thought were the best whiskeys. It was what I thought were the best stories. And they had to, I had to think they were good whiskeys as well. But
well, something tells me that as you make your way through Kentucky and the many other centers where bourbon is coming from, that you're going to have plenty of stories to tell in that film. And you can submit more to me. Bourbon Heritage Month isn't over.
I've got more photos, that's for sure. Because when I sent you the photos that I sent, I went through all my photos, from that trip, and I was like, oh yeah, I forgot about this, and it's awesome. And I've been speaking with the Kentucky Tourist Board, trying to get things right, they've been really helpful as well. So
I mean, look, don't get me wrong. There's a lot of great whiskey that's coming out of Kentucky, but I'll tell you that there are a lot of rising stars that are coming from many other parts of the United States that are making amazing whiskey. And I think the acquisitions that you've seen just here, late in this year, I think there's going to be more of that going on.
We're as you and I were talking beforehand. People may know this. We're editing a companion film to The Water of Life about independent bottlers. And one of the guys that we got to interview was a fascinating guy named Dr. Alan Rutherford, who was the first CEO of Diageo before they were even called Diageo, United Distillers Limited, and then now is on the board, the chairman of the board for Compass Box, the independent whiskey maker. And he talked a lot about whiskey rising all over the world, and about the world shrinking, and sort of anyone who wants to find out any technology or technique can find it online. So then it just becomes a matter of committing yourself to the craft. And he was talking about how you can't just like bourbon. Kentucky just can't rest on its laurels. Scotland can't rest on its laurels, because there's all over the world countries that have never made whiskey are making whiskey, and good whiskey.
And you know what? If you ask me, and if you look at a lot of what's been happening in the industry, I'll tell you, I think I came into the year thinking that American single malt was probably going to rise up out of nowhere and probably surprise everyone, and that there was going to be this revolution that was going to happen. I think what happened is they got their designation, and then there were a couple of things that happened, but that phenomenon that you just talked about, with there being so much whiskey out there, I still think it hasn't helped their identity yet. It still hasn't picked up, and I think in some way it's kind of hurting them, because bourbon and American whiskey in general is just so huge and so diverse.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know Single Cast Nation guys on their podcast just last week, they did a thing about this sort of, we've reached this point where whiskey collectors are always looking for a different bottle. It's always a different bottle, and it's gotten so much so that it's actually going to start to kind of create a bottleneck, pun intended, in sales, because distilleries can only release so many expressions. They can't.
Yeah.
And if you're always looking for something different, instead of I love this, I'm going to buy it again, it's like, I love this, what else do they have? And I think that's happening not just in Scotland. I think it's happening all over the place, whiskey, and now varieties as well.
Think of it this way, though. Last year, I had the opportunity to speak with Jackie Zykan, and I think one of the frustrations that Jackie had is she's making all of this great whiskey, but what's happening is people are hoarding it. How many times is she at a whiskey show and she's talking about somebody coming up and saying, "Hey, I need you to sign this bottle for me," and the implication is I'm never going to open this bottle, and her philosophy is, "No, I want you to drink this stuff." So her jumping over to Hidden Barn and doing something different, the philosophy there is, I'm making this for you to drink, and I want you to drink it now. And that mindset is having a huge shift in the industry. I guess I can reveal it to you, but Whiskey Network in December is going to have Rob Dietrich from Blackened American Whiskey on the cover. We're going to do Metallica through and through the issue. I'm asking for food pairings and cigar pairings that all have to do with blackened whiskey. But I spent the morning talking to him and talking about the whiskey, and one of the most refreshing things that he said to me, of the many things that he said, is he doesn't like the coveting of the bottles. He doesn't do that himself. If you look at his whiskey shelf, sure, he's probably got some things on there that might be rare. He has a Blanton's or a Colonel Taylor, but he doesn't chase the bottles. He says, I buy my whiskey and I have my whiskey to drink it. I don't save anything. My whole thing is I want to cycle through my collection. And when Metallica approached making their whiskey, sorry for the commercial, was I not allowed to do this?
Not at all.
Yeah, I mean, come on. How many mornings do you get to drink a dram with Rob Dietrich before you get on with Greg Schwartz, and then you get to talk about it? I had to say something, but in any case, it was just a very refreshing perspective to hear that from a whiskey maker, and I think the winds are shifting a little bit.
Yeah, well, it'll be interesting to see. I mean, it always is. It's always interesting. The whiskey industry is always fascinating, and it's a weird industry where every decision you make has to be. Every decision is a future decision. You know what I mean? It's not to beat on this again, but in the same interview I was just editing today with Alan Rutherford, he talked about, in basically running Diageo or UDL in the 80s. And he said, we're making whiskey, we're producing spirit today that is intended for Johnny Walker Black in 12 years. So our projections are what's going to be the needs in 12 years. And he was talking about how it's impossible to be accurate. You just have to be as accurate as you can. And it's a weird industry that way. Like, vodka and gin aren't like that, where you can course correct monthly, but to be able to plan out 3+ years for everything is crazy.
Yeah, I mean, but isn't that the appeal of whiskey, though, that there's that sort of magical component that you put something in a barrel and then you went and put it away for 10 or 12 years, and now you're wondering what it looks like on the other side of that. I mean, if there's something that I definitely took away from your first film, is that, you tried to sort of quantify exactly what that was, or what people do to influence that.
Well, and it's, if anyone here who's ever been in a distillery, if you go into a warehouse, it's the feeling I equate it to is like when I was a little kid, maybe in kindergarten or first grade, we buried not a time machine. What the hell do they call it? Time capsule. We buried a time capsule in the playground at my school. And then in like 4 years later, we dug it up. And just in that 4 years, like, we were little kids, so that seemed like forever. But it was like really cool, and just long enough that we had forgotten about it. And then, and then that's what I feel like when I go into a whiskey distillery, like, oh, this was made. Like, you always try to like reverse engineer, where was I when this was made? I know that's a line in the film, but Bill Varnell, by the way, who he referenced earlier, the publisher. I'm such a filmmaker. The publisher of Whiskey Network magazine. Bourbon distilleries have begun to experiment with more cask finishes, and that way create interest in new expressions. Absolutely, and that's Scotland recently also, maybe 3 years ago now, I think it was. Graham Fraser's here; he might remember the date. But Scotland, I know it used to just be you couldn't do tequila casks, you couldn't, and now they can. They've kind of loosened the belt on what kind of cask. I think it's in Scotland, it's still only oak. I know in Ireland, I was just at the Waterford distillery, and they had all kinds of different cherry woods and acacia woods and birch.
I don't want to put you off, but I'm going to pour myself a dram here. This is the 3-chord bourbon. Speaking of finished casks, it's finished in Pinot Noir casks. I'm probably offending a bunch of the whiskey. What is it? The high table of whiskey that you're not supposed to finish it in a wine cask, but here I am. So I'm going to pour myself a dram.
Well, I was actually at the beginning. I meant to say, I hopefully you'll have 2, since I'm not having any. I will. I promise you, I will make up for it.
A Water of Life Glencairn. I'm going to apologize to Fonz because I stole this from him at a tasting event that we were at. So, Fonz, this is the reason why your Glencairn went missing, because I put it in my bag.
I don't know that Fonz is watching. I think he's shooting. He's filming today. He's been gone for a while. Graham Fraser, who's a friend of the film and a frequent contributor here and here, I've always been fascinated with how master blenders, whiskey makers, make those projections and influence bean counters and marketing folk have in the process. Well, I'm happy to tell you, Graham, literally almost verbatim, that was part of that edit we were working on today. Is, he talked. Dr. Rutherford would say, the marketing people would tell us we're going to do this and this and this market and this market and this market, and then we would crunch it all down and say, okay, this year we make this much whiskey. And it was, and he said it was. How did he word it? Their Christmas bonuses are based on how well they do, so they're always painting rosy pictures. And in the 80s, those pictures turned out to not be so rosy.
When has a marketing person ever told you that it wasn't going to jump by 10%? Come on.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
Well, I would submit to you that maybe some of that too, some of that altruistic thinking may be what feeds the independent bottling scene. I mean, look, if there aren't barrels of whiskey that aren't accounted for, you're not going to get a little bit of that creative process for independent bottlers to tap into that. So, that's just a side effect of dealing with that in the industry that's been around for a long time.
It's interesting because, like, you have a distillery the least, I think, probably the least famous distillery on Isla is Kalila, but it's the biggest by far because it's one of the main components of Johnny Walker Black. And so for decades, Diageo just runs it at full stick the whole time. And if the market waxes and wanes, they just sell more off to independent bottlers. And if they need it, they sell less off. And, that way they can just keep it going. It's just an absolute workhorse. And
I think the thing that still puzzles me is what's Gordon and MacPhail doing by not being in that business. That's the thing that I haven't been able to decipher. Can you help me with that one?
I mean, first of all, we're doing an updated interview with them because of that announcement recently. In case anyone here doesn't know that, they've announced that the second oldest independent bottler in the world, and they're going to stop bottling spirits that are not their own. They own 2 distilleries, and they're only going to bottle that. However, I have not spoken to them yet, other than to set up a follow-up interview. But I will tell you this: if you read the small print of that announcement, it says that they're going to do that over the next 70 years. Which, that speaks a lot about the timelines of whiskey world, that you can make an announcement about what you're going to do in 70 years. I think they got tired of being told that we're not going to sell you casks anymore or they don't buy casks. Actually, they buy spirit.
Mm-hmm.
They have their own wood, but they got tired of being one more after another saying no. So, and now they have 2 distilleries, an old one and a new one.
At some point, it's going to become more and more difficult to position a spirit or a bottle as being exclusive, unique, tasting different, or any number of things out there. And I'm not slamming on the industry. I'm just saying there seems to me that there's perhaps a limited runway for all of this. And the more people try to make things exclusive, the more people try to make things scarce, I think it drives them to the bigger producers because it's readily available.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I'd like to hear your thoughts on this. I have my own thoughts on this. Graham asks us, do we ever see an independent bottler sector growing in the U.S.? Graham, do you mean of bourbon, or do you mean of Scotch whiskey in the U.S.? Because there is one very big one in the U.S. that most people don't even know about. I'll let you weigh in on that, Mark, if you have any thoughts on it in general.
Well, if you stop and think about it, there already is sort of a robust independent bottler scene in the United States anyways. And look at all the brands that have risen out of repackaging MGP juice. I mean, mm-hmm. is that technically American independent bottling? I would say that's really kind of the face of that here in the United States. Now, is there going to be an independent bottler scene that comes out of Kentucky? I don't think the Kentucky guys will ever let that happen. I don't think that's on the brand roadmap for as strong as Kentucky bourbon is. Mm-hmm. Is there going to be a independent bottling of Pappy 23? Something. I don't know that I see that.
Well, I do think that there might be a independent bottling movement emerge out of single malt, American single malt. That's my guess, but a bourbon and U.S. single malt independent bottlers quality market. Yeah, I mean, well, to some degree, Graham, he has specified what he was talking about. To some degree, I think there is one in that, like Single Cask Nation, for example. Those guys, they release American whiskeys. They release, they just released a brandy. They release Swedish whiskeys. They started out just doing Scotch, but they do a lot of bourbons now. And in case anyone in Scotland, Graham, maybe you know this, but what we're talking about with MGP is a distillery in Indiana that is basically they produce. I believe were they purchased now by Sazerac?
Yes, they have a different name, and I didn't say that, and I'm probably getting it incorrect.
Squibb and Royal or something.
Squibb and something, yeah.
So anyway, they basically produce spirit for new startups, so you can sell whiskey right away. I mean, and they also sell like grocery store brands and stuff like that. They're not their own brand; they're their own they are their own. They're just a producer of spirit, and they sell
Yeah.
it to, and a lot of really well known. I mean, Whistle Pig, right, was all MGP at the beginning. High West was all MGP.
High
No,
West
Whistle Pig.
was.
Whistle Pig was getting spirit out of Canada, right? That was their.
Oh,
wasn't it big con?
that might be correct, but I mean, three-chord bourbon. Three-chord bourbon doesn't get MGP juice, or they go through and they get bottles from bottles. They get barrels from distillers all over the country. So, it's. I don't think it's in the same spirit as being an independent bottler, but it's kind of the same mechanics that exist, where you're taking barrels because of the taste and because it goes to your flavor profile and you want to use it in that way.
Yeah, and in fairness to MGP, they will. It's not just the same spirit going to everyone. They do have various
Something a little different. Yes.
Yeah. So David, bottling source spirit is basically yes. I mean, they can get a little more complicated than that. Speaking from a Scotland perspective, like Compass Box is an independent whiskey maker in that they source all of their spirit from one distillery and then they do their own things with it. So they don't, they're not out buying casks and bottling individual casks like the way like Single Cask Nation does. But they're all kind of in a general category. That's sort of what they're doing. They're sourcing spirit. They don't own distilleries, although nowadays some of them do in different divisions. The bigger ones are. To answer your other question, yes, they're. I believe they have now released the definition of U.S. single malt.
Yeah,
right?
that was earlier this year. We interviewed Thomas Mooney from Westward, and he was excited about that. But there's divisions in the American single malt industry. They all don't agree that that's what it should be, or there's differences. So I think the American single malt industry has a good decade of growth ahead of it. But in that decade, they need to settle a lot of things between all of them as well. They need to all genuinely agree to what the definition is and sort of gravitate towards that, versus I think there's still the mentality of kind of being renegade and being different, which I don't have an issue with. I think it's just a natural part of the process, especially after the law coming down, or the designation coming down, excuse me.
Well, we actually had someone kind of say where I was going with this when they were saying about American independent bottlers. So there is an American independent bottler that a lot of people don't know by name called Alexander Murray. They used to be based in LA. They might still legally, I think, but I believe the owner has moved to Miami. Alexander Murray is a huge independent bottler of Scotch whiskey in the U.S., largely because they do white label bottlings for Kirkland and Trader Joe's.
Yep.
Those are huge, huge brands. Now, they do release their own whiskeys. There are Alexander Murray branded single casks of other whiskeys that they've sourced and stuff. But that's I think a very small piece of their business. And they're fascinating to me because they do all of this sort of quietly. Like, that's just their business model. Is they're not. But if you look at a Costco bottle of whiskey, on the back, it'll almost always say matured and bottled by Alexander Murray, Scotland.
My Costco now and again will actually carry a branded Alexander Murray bottle. I think it's a 20 year or 21 year.
And my Trader Joe's, I live in Silver Lake, and the Trader Joe's in Silver Lake has bottles of Alexander Murray whiskey sometimes. But if you look at the Trader Joe's brand, they're not always, but usually they're Alexander Murray bottlings as well.
There was a rumor of who was who produced this year's Kirkland signature Isla whiskey, and the rumor was that it was Caolila.
People were fighting about it. I saw that, and people were arguing about it. No, it's Port Charlotte, and although I thought Rachel McNeil's comment on why it wasn't Port Charlotte was brilliant, which is it's half the price of the same age stated Port Charlotte. So why would you want to say, like, do you love this whiskey? Well, let's charge half as much for it. Because they sell all they can produce anyway. So I don't know. I honestly don't know what it is, but I think it's probably Caolila.
The prevailing wind was that, and that's when the infighting died down.
Yeah, I mean, all these Isla distilleries, Caolila is the only one you see in independent bottlings commonly. Every now and then you see a Lafroig and stuff, or Bunnahabhain, but they I think all the distilleries there are selling all of the whiskey they can possibly make, so they don't sell it on. They don't sell their casks on. I mean, obviously, selling it today wouldn't have any effect right away, but it's definitely dwindling.
Sure, I would agree with that.
I think we're eventually going to get to a point where Isla, the word Isla on an independent bottle is going to mean Kalila.
Well, they're the biggest, and they seem to be growing in that perspective. Where I think most of the other ones have been fairly comfortable to maintain the more controlled trajectory of where they are versus exploding and getting huge.
Yeah, yeah. Um, Graham Fraser asked, could a U.S. independent bottler buy bourbon and U.S. single malt casks, store and bottle them centrally, and still call them as those styles of? Yeah, absolutely. There's no state limitation on what it is. Even Kentucky is not. You can make bourbon outside of Kentucky. I realize Bourbon County is in Kentucky, but you can make bourbon
Yes,
outside of Kentucky.
that's it's a brilliant move from a marketing perspective, because people will argue unendingly whether it is bourbon or whether it's American whiskey. So if anybody's listening who's thinking about doing that, do it, because it's priceless marketing that you can buy for yourself.
Yeah. And that's not to say, Graham, that you wouldn't have a million headaches dealing with every state, but you're going to have that anyway. It's because it's not, the U.S. is not one whiskey market; it's 50 whiskey markets, and some states are pretty chill. Mark and I are in one of them, but
Yep.
I come from a state that's arguably the most difficult in the country. It's certainly top three.
I would say the American West is probably one of the most shocking, at least to me, being here on the West Coast. One of the most shockingly underrated regions from a whiskey perspective. Woodinville whiskey, High West whiskey. You have Smoke Wagon and Frey Ranch coming out of Vegas, and all of the distilleries that are contained here in Southern California. You don't hear a lot about those. The fantastic distilleries that are in Colorado. It's just this great undiscovered territory of whiskey that we have out here.
there's a couple of really notable ones in Oregon and Washington.
Westward, that was
Westward,
Woodinville, Westward.
McCarthy's. Copperworks is small, but I've only had 2 Copperworks, but they're amazing.
But see, these aren't really. So Smoke Wagon, arguably getting to be a household name. Frey Ranch, flying under the radar.
Yeah. And the California, anyway, the distribution here. Last week when we were doing this live with Holly, she was joking that independent bottlers in the U.S. get trapped in California. Most independent bottlers will distribute so few bottles from Scotland to the U.S. And some of the biggest independent distributors in the U.S. are in California. So it's easier for them to never ship it anywhere else. They'll just sell it all. Everything they can get, they can sell in California.
Sure. Have you ever been to the Los Angeles distillery?
I was just at the Obscure, which is the old Lost Spirits, but I can't remember what they're called now. So no is your answer.
Maybe we got to plan a field trip and we got to go there.
Well, do you know the Obscure?
No, I don't.
It's a speakeasy cocktail evening. It's like a theatrical event in the old Lost Spirits distillery. Well, it's in the old Villains bar in downtown LA. There's a bar.
Oh, okay. Yes.
And it's a whole you get 3 drams neat and 3 cocktails, each made with those 3 drams. It's really cool. I went with my wife. Took her there for her birthday, and we loved it. Although they don't have food, at least not yet, and my wife had not eaten beforehand, so
I don't know about that.
I was fine.
I don't want to jump around, but you mentioned cocktails. I think cocktails are making a very strong comeback. There's very much an idea right now floating around. Our webmaster Genevieve, we were talking about this, and that there's cocktails are all of a sudden getting hot, and I think a part of it is you had a lot in some whiskey makers did this where there was the ready to drink stuff. You can get the premixed Jack and Coke
Hmm.
now, or you can get old fashions or Manhattans. But there is a very lively culture that's rising, and I don't think it's just here in Los Angeles or other metropolitan cities like New York. I think that there's a cocktail culture that's jumping out pretty much everywhere.
I totally agree with you because I've had 3 conversations with 3 different people from 3 different regional cities, all of whom talked about their city's cocktail culture as if it was a foregone conclusion that they were the preeminent cocktail city in America. One of them was Rochester. One of them was Chicago, and one of them was in Northern California. And so no one, not all, they all can't be right.
Well, there's room for everybody, isn't there?
Well, sure, no, but they can't all be the best. I mean, I think I should find out. I think we should raise money and send me on a tour where I can do a and
I don't want to get I don't want to get crazy, Greg, but a cocktail film.
well, well, watch this space maybe. But yeah, I definitely would like to do that. I'm working on 2 things that are more specific than just cocktails in general, but definitely cocktail based. Yeah, and I've seen, obviously I have good relationships with Bricklati and I've seen all their brands. Like I have not had any kind of advance warning of this. I'm just witnessed it as someone who follows them. Like their ads, their marketing, their social media has become more and more cocktail based. I mean, I think all of these companies see it as a growth area that's not being exploited yet. Why not? Why not put good spirits in your cocktail? Why just use well drinks to make your cocktail? Why not let it really shine?
Yeah, but cocktails are also a gateway into other things. That you think, what the heck was in that cocktail? Well, it was Buffalo Trace, or it was this, or it was that. So it gets you into other things.
Yeah. Um, it's funny. I got to tell you, the Fever Tree. They make the tonic.
Oh yes.
Their marketing is brilliant because a lot of the marketing just says if 2/3 of your gin and tonic is the tonic, shouldn't you care about what the tonic is? Which is just, it feels so like right there once you hear it.
This is true.
Hold on, yeah. So Graham, before I move away from that entirely, yeah, Graham Fraser said there's rumors in Scotland that Diageo might limit Kalila. I can't say I would blame them, but they produce so much of this stuff, they'd almost have to dial back the distillery. Because I can't imagine Johnny Walker Black is growing. I know it has a big market slice, and it is what it is, but I can't see it as a growth product. Maybe they're going to produce more Kalila in house. I mean, as Kalila, not as Johnny Walker.
What is growth to something like a Johnny Walker Black? I mean, they could have a 10,000 swing in either direction and not even feel it. So that's volumetrics at work as well. That they're just not even they're in such rarefied air that it doesn't make a difference. What did David Yancey say? He's one of our writers at Whiskey Network.
Oh, I said there's cocktails are growing here in Dallas Fort Worth as well. Mixologists are coming back and making their mark.
Yeah, I think again, just going back to what we were talking about with Whiskey Network and the shifts that are happening at Whiskey Network. We understand there are people who enjoy the whiskey, and that what's in your glass is important, but something that we also deeply believe in is there's a lifestyle that's around this, that you've positioned your film to tell a great story about how whiskey is ingrained into the social fabric of our lives. But think about that, how that comes about, right? It comes about through food, it comes about through the cocktails, it comes about through learning that your favorite bands or the people that you see on television are doing certain things. They like certain types of whiskey, or they like certain types of cocktails. So look, I want to make sure that you understand that this is a very sort of diverse approach to really getting into the lifestyle of whiskey, and that it's not just one facet of what's happening into the industry.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, I certainly I've been drinking more cocktails than I've ever drunk. I mean, over the summer I was drinking a lot of gin and tonics. Started experimenting with a lot of different gins. Obviously, I've got a certain fondness for botanist, but I mean, this summer I was drinking lots of different
Sure.
gins and side by siding them, and and now I'm doing this dry month. I've been drinking, non-alcoholic cocktails, which are just, to be honest with you, just always a little disappointing. They taste good, but you just kind of, you can just tell there's something missing. Yeah, the
But
heart's
John Paul touches on something, and I was having a conversation with someone the other day that there's something here with the people who don't drink, who are making these mocktails, or that are even the industry around the non-alcoholic spirits. There's something there, and I just don't know that we've fully explored that or fully understood that. I mean, I'd love to delve into it. I'd love to have our writers get into it, because I think it's a fascinating subject. Do I think that maybe there's some guardrails around that? Yeah, it's there's a lot to chew on there, and there's a lot to take apart as a part of that. So I think we just need to be careful about what we take on, because there's a line with booze that you just need to be very cognizant of.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. I mean, now JP also said, yeah, cannabis extracts. I mean, I've certainly, as states, more and more states have legalized cannabis. I've seen it. I saw cannabis wine. So but not I haven't seen the cocktails yet. It's funny. I feel like you and I are having two conversations simultaneously, because we're talking about Kalila and we're talking about cocktails, which is I'm kind of fun. I'm there for this. I can dig it
Independent
because,
bottling, Bourbon Heritage Month, and then that
yeah.
Whiskey Network thing. Yeah, I mean, come on. This is just a typical conversation between you and I. This is endemic of the conversations that you and I have pretty much constantly.
Yeah, and I have to say I'm really pretty good at going off on weird tangents, and then losing sight of where I was at the start, which is fine. I don't, I'm cool with it. People seem to be fine with it too. But yeah, Graham said that Diageo are pushing a ever expanding range of Johnny Walker blends. That's a good point. I hadn't thought about that. I mean, there does seem to be, they're going to run out of colors eventually. Different Johnny Walker Purple and Johnny Walker Clear.
Think of Johnny Walker's position on the branding scale, right? You can pretty much walk into any bar in the world and there's Johnny Walker on the shelf. So, it is a welcome port of entry. And if you're in a bar in some place and you don't know the local fare, and you see a bottle of Johnny Walker, and it's doesn't Johnny Walker have like a rye that's on the market now? That's one of the the variants of the green label, or any sort of thing. So it makes it easy. I was actually just having this conversation this morning. For a long time, my airport dram was Johnny Walker Black, because it was something that you could get. It was something that was consistent. But something that has changed is now there are bars and airports that are carrying local or regional brands, and that's different. Now you can go and you can have. I was just in Denver. I was in Denver International Airport, and they had Frey Ranch and Smoke Wagon. So I tried a couple of drams while I was waiting for my plane.
Nice. But yeah, I think that the ubiquity of Johnny Walker has always been, it's reached that sort of saturation point. Same with like Jack Daniels, that it has a certain level of availability where it's there when you need it.
Correct, but you also see them now branching out into a bunch of different things. I mean, what's the the Coy Hill, the ultra crazy barrel proof strength rye that they have that everybody's coveting and you can't get a hold of, and it's like 140 proof or something ridiculous. It's I don't want to drink that, but I'm a lightweight.
Yeah. Before I forget, because we haven't even touched on this, and I think this is you're my go-to guy for this very specific niche, and you kind of mentioned it a little bit, but we haven't really dealt with it, which is, I know you're fascinated with the meeting point between whiskey and rock and roll. No, music in general, I'm sure, but I mean specifically for you, I think it's rock and roll.
Yes, metal music and rock and roll music has a long history with whiskey and probably a whole bunch of other substances. But since we're playing in the space of whiskey, um, for just me personally, I go to somewhere between 30 and 35 shows a year. Some of those are bands that I may have been spoken to and bring into the magazine. I think the last time I counted over the 3 years, I think I've done 32, 34 interviews with rock stars, authors, actors, professional athletes, you name it. We've had some great names in the room, and it's really wonderful to hear them talk about how they think about whiskey, what they drink, and how they consume it as well.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, there's certainly no end of history with music, and I mean, even not rock and roll, but like Frank Sinatra. I mean, I know there's the Jack
Sure.
Daniels Sinatra blended. I actually saw Sinatra in concert, his last tour.
No
I,
kidding.
I well, I think you know this about me. When I lived in Pennsylvania, I was a reporter for a newspaper, and I
Oh
covered the
yes.
music. I covered the music scene in central Pennsylvania, and I go to a lot of concerts in Hershey, and I got to go see Sinatra, and we got to go backstage. Although that was literally long enough to watch him get into a limousine and leave. But as he walked from the stage to the limousine, someone handed him a tumbler full of whiskey. And it was like he didn't even break stride. He handed one guy the microphone, another guy handed him a whiskey, and it was into the limo and gone. But I was
I
like,
was at
that's a good Frank Sinatra sighting.
So last January I was at we covered the Metal Hall of Fame, and we have a great partnership with the Metal Hall of Fame, and Twisted Sister was inducted. So D. Snyder is 6'3". He's got a huge head full of dyed blonde hair, and he's out there. He doesn't care about anything. And I've been kind of waiting backstage just for a quiet moment, and he was signing bottles. As a matter of fact, I have one here. Um, Rakavaka. He has his vodka, and they're a sponsor. And he didn't really like the fact that Whiskey Network was also a sponsor on the bill because he didn't know who the hell Whiskey Network was. So they were packing up and they were leaving, and they had to get on a plane to go to Vegas. And I said, "Hey, D, do you have a couple minutes? I'd love to talk to you." And he told me to f off, and he ran out the door. And somebody was handing him a drink as he was leaving. So there's my similar story for you.
Well, here our good friend Udo Sontag asked, "Whoops, I just hit the wrong one." But well, when do you think supply will meet demand for allocated bourbon? We'll get to
I
that
don't
one in
think.
a second because I want to
Okay,
stick
go.
on the rock and roll
Yes.
for a second. What is the perfect match for music and single malt whiskey? I don't know. I
Well,
think a different whiskey, right? Different whiskey for a
uh,
different band.
sure. Depends. Look, I don't listen to exclusively metal and crazy rock and roll music. I listen to a lot of things, and I don't mean to be trite, but what goes really great with a wonderful single malt dram is some baroque music, some baroque trumpet, and you just got it on in the background, and it's just something that's sort of wafting through the air, or some jazz, some some good jazz, the Blue Note era jazz, Lee Morgan or early Miles Davis or McCoy Tyner or something like that. When I think of a dram that goes well with a single malt, that's what comes to my mind.
I wasn't drinking but I was just listening to John Coltrane last night. Some old
Yep.
I
Yes.
was listening to Blue Train last night.
Yep.
And I've had certainly plenty of drams with that. I mean, it's funny. One of the things I always drink whiskey with, but not necessarily single malts, but I always drink whiskey when I listen to the Pogues, and the Pogues have been my favorite band since I was a teenager. So
Yep.
I know they have their own whiskey now too. I had a bottle of it for a while. I don't know what happened to it. I think it must have leaked out the bottom or something, or maybe leaked out
I
the top.
Look, there are no shortage of stories that I can tell you about misadventures that I've had. I was introduced. Josh Barnett is on our cover for the month of September, and I met him backstage at a Behemoth concert. Behemoth is a death metal band from Poland, and I'm in the green room waiting to meet their drummer, who I interviewed. Um, Zbigniew is his name. but his stage name is Inferno. He's a very reclusive man who doesn't talk to a lot of people. So I get introduced to Josh Barnett, who's an MMA fighter, and he hands me a dram of whiskey, and he says, "This is my whiskey. I'd like you to try it." Well, he makes this whiskey that's ultra smoked with mesquite, and mesquite is powerful. You have Octomore, which is cold smoked, but if that were mesquite, it would knock you out of your chair if it was that powerful. And I'm kind of nervous because I'm going to meet somebody, and I'm backstage at the Palladium, and I don't know what the hell is happening. I shoot the whiskey, which was absolutely the wrong thing to do, and I was mortified because I looked him in the eye, and he gave me a really funny look, and I said, "I shouldn't have shot that, right?" And he goes, "Yeah, you probably shouldn't have done that." So Inferno walks into the room, and I was like, "Hey, excuse me, like, I need to talk to this guy." And we had a great conversation. They invited us into the dressing room, and lo and behold, Inferno has this cardboard box of samples that someone has given. There must have been 20 samples. We sat backstage at the Palladium, and I drank Single Cast Nation. I drank all of these crazy drams that somebody had given him samples of, and we all sat there and we just talked about it. And it's funny because afterwards, my son says, "Dad, you guys look like a bunch of idiots because all you were doing was holding up your glass and you were looking at the color and you were smelling them and you weren't tasting anything." And I was like, "Well, yeah, you're driving because I drank too much." But that was a really fun experience that I've had backstage with some folks. So it has its perks.
I will say from a music standpoint, I thought of this. This is very specific, but there's a Scottish band, a current band called Tidelines, and they're from the Hebrides, and they play on Isla a lot. And at least for the last few years, they've always ended the Bruichladdich party on their festival, their open day at the Feshiel. And they play a song called "Walking on the Waves," which is just the most. It's one of those earworm songs that gets stuck in your head. They didn't even
Mm-hmm.
write it; it's a cover of an older song. But there's something about that song that just it takes me right back there. Like because well, I'll be honest with you. The 3 times I've been to their open day at the festival, by the time I'm hearing that song, I am many drams in. So I'm well ready to absorb the emotional impact of it. It's a very light, fun song. It's a really well written song, but it's not a deep, meaningful song. It's just like a fun, poppy kind of Celtic, rocky pop song.
I took my wife to Ireland earlier this year for our 25th anniversary, and you know, I'm gonna be down there, so we did the big Jameson distillery. I'm not a big Jameson guy, but it's okay. I think that there is an interesting time happening in Irish whiskey right now, and you and I have had plenty of conversations about this. But they had a band. I don't know what it was. It was kind of the same thing. It wasn't the hit of the day or whatever, but they were playing some sort of an earworm. So now, whenever I think of you know very classic Irish whiskey, that song plays in my head. I have no idea what the title of the song is, but there you go. So core memories for you right there.
So let's pivot again and answer that question we got from a few minutes ago. When do you think supply will meet demand for allocated bourbon?
I don't think that it's ever going to happen, and here's why. There's no incentive for that to occur. There's no incentive for Pappy Van Winkle to be on everybody's shelves. They have every incentive in the world to make sure that it's hard to get. So I got to be honest with you, I don't think it's going to happen.
I agree. I think they like it.
I
I think,
100%.
especially when they own multiple brands. You can get Buffalo Trace pretty easily, and you can't get. I mean, I went to the distillery and they didn't have any Pappy. I mean, I'm sure they did, but they didn't have it for sale.
I was at Sam's Club this past weekend, and there was a pallet of Buffalo Trace. And to needle some of my friends who can't get it as easily, I'm taking pictures of this pallet of Buffalo Trace and I'm sending it to them. So, I don't fault and I'm not upset with the whiskey makers for doing what they do, but distinctly my answer to the question is I don't think it's ever going to happen.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny to me that I mean that's not funny is not the right word. It's interesting to me that I can get literally the grocery store up the street from me I could go buy 12 bottles of Buffalo Trace at $25 a bottle right now. I mean,
Hmm.
26.99, I think it was. I was there yesterday.
Sure. And
And it's a stack. It's an Albertsons. I mean, you live in
sure.
California. It's
Yeah.
basically it's a Safeway. It's a mid. This isn't some boutique grocery store.
I wanted to give a shout out because that was Dave Schelling. Dave Schelling was a salesperson at my first job out of college. And speaking of whiskey, talk about earning your wings, getting out of college and going to work for a company that partied hard. Our CEO, or no, it wasn't the CEO, it was the VP of sales, was upset one year when we had a cocktail party for our clients, and the bill was only $15,000 or something, and he thought it should have been more. He thought we weren't taking care of the clients the way that we should have. So shout out to Dave. Thanks for watching.
It's funny. A lot of people are putting great song and whiskey. This is awesome because you're onto
Yeah.
something. Obviously, I mean, there's loads of people here that are putting in good comments of like what whiskey they like with what music.
Dream Theater and Lagavulin.
I think it's it's a personal thing, and for me, mine changes all the time. But I do listen to music a lot when I'm having a dram. But what it's going to be is always going to be different.
A band that I've been chasing for some time is Flogging Molly. And I always get the token email from their publicist, and we just never seem to find time getting it together. But I'd love to have Flogging Molly in the magazine, and I'd love to talk about their connection to whiskey and whiskey culture. I think that would be a fascinating discussion. But you're right, there are many people in many walks of music that love whiskey, and it's amazing how you can take like the craziest death metal rock star people, and then you have somebody who's in more folk or traditional music, and they have the same views on whiskey. It's
Mm-hmm.
it's unbelievable how people come together over a beverage.
There's an old, obviously old, but even by their standards, a very old, early Simon and Garfunkel song called "Blues Run the Game."
Mm-hmm.
Not one of their biggest hits, but I think a somewhat well-known song. But the first line of that song is "Send out for whiskey, baby, send out for gin." I can't tell you how many times that line goes through my head when I'm going to go get myself a whiskey, whether it's out of my own cabinet or in a bar or whatever. That there's something about that line of that song that always goes through my head.
I just think that there's a very rich and a mystical connection between the two, and it's a fantastic thing. And it's when I love to go to shows. I'm going to a show tonight. One of my best friends in the world is having a very difficult time. Roger, I don't know if you're watching, but I'm thinking of you. And he's had a rough year, and he said, oh, maybe we can have a drink of whiskey before we walk over to the show because the venue's right near his house. And he sent me a picture of Three Chord Bourbon's double oak dram that he bought, that was in that we set up as a part of our group. So it's just something that's really wonderful and woven into the fabric of our lives, and it's an awesome thing to explore. Yeah, there you go, Dave. Dave knows Roger as well. We all work together at that company, and it's an amazing testimony because Roger and I bonded over whiskey. He had a Jack Daniel's flag in his cubicle, so we've been great friends since then.
What was the concert I had a year or so ago? I had tickets to a concert I couldn't go to, and I gave them
Dinosaur Jr.
Dinosaur Jr. Okay, that would be good with an Octomore. Blast your palate, blast your ears.
Oh, it's legal in California, but an edible and a dram of whiskey at a Dinosaur Jr. concert. Yes, that's a wonderful thing. Allegedly.
It's funny because I've seen Dinosaur. I've been a fan for years, and the first time I went to see them, my friend said, "Did you bring earplugs?" I said, "No," and he's like, "You're going to want earplugs." I was like, I've been going to concerts since from blah blah blah. I mean, they were 3 songs in, and I was rolling up napkins and putting them in my ears. I have never seen a show like that ever, because it's usually a fairly small venue, and it's just face melting.
That was
Um,
the El Rey Theater up on Hollywood Boulevard,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
something like that. It was a great show. I'm thankful for the tickets.
El Rey, it's on Wilshire.
It's not the El
Uh,
Rey then. It's the
Roxy. Uh, oh
no,
no, the Fonda, the
no.
music
It's the
boxes.
Fonda.
Yeah,
Yes, yes, yes. The Fonda. Yes, that's what it is.
yeah. Well, Mark, it's 2 o'clock. Uh, we did it. We talked for a solid hour. I stopped lying. I always used to say, "Oh, we're going to do this for 40 minutes," but it's an hour every week. Um, and we've had an amazing list of questions, amazing audience. I really, really appreciate everyone joining us today on your Friday. And hope you'll join me next week. I do not have a guest. I had a guest lined up for next week, and she's had to reschedule. So I'm going to find someone, and I'll announce it on Monday. And
You want
I'll
to
let you.
you want me to come back and we'll do the Oprah side of the interview, where you make me
Yeah,
cry and show me a picture of my mom or something, or
yeah. Hey, next week I'm going to be off my dry month, so I'll get tucked in too.
how about if I
Uh,
come back and interview you next week as you come off of your dry month?
okay.
I keep threatening that that's what I'm going to do, and we've never been able to find the time.
Well, Keith Duncan says he's free. Keith is Keith administers our Facebook group for us.
I would love that. I think that would be awesome.
All right, you want to do it, Keith? You hear it. All right, and Mark, come back. I'll get
Okay.
some other people to join us. But Keith, let's do it. I'm going to do it. I'm going to have Keith Duncan come join us, and he can talk about having to throw people out of our Facebook group.
Well, thank you for having me. Thank you for
No,
allowing me to talk about Whiskey Network. Look, if you haven't been to the site, we're new and we're not new, we're newly redesigned, and there's a lot of great things that are happening. And I'm accessible. I'm out there. If you have questions, I'd certainly be happy to answer those things. I'm the editor. I'm pushing things forward. I'm bringing new things to the table. Greg is going to write for us for the rest of the year. You heard it here first. He's one of our staff writers now. I'm just kidding. But we've got a new look and feel, and I'd love for everybody to go in and kind of kick the tires. Please sign up to subscribe. We'd love to have you aboard, and what's going to be happening for the rest of the year is going to be exciting. We have a stable of some amazing writers. Some of them are in the audience. I saw Joe, I saw David, both awesome writers for us that bring a lot of eyeballs in. So thank you, Greg. I appreciate the opportunity.
no, I really, really appreciate you joining me. Thanks so much, and thanks for everyone. Thanks everyone. Have a good weekend. Have a good Friday. Have a good dram.
Bye, everyone.
Cheers.